Parents, teachers, guardians, and mentors. We can all agree you've got big shoes to fill, and it may feel like they're always getting bigger and more daunting. Welcome to Parenting Adventures, where we aim to be a beacon of support and knowledge for those navigating the complexities of parenting. Each episode, we bring on experts to walk us through the most pressing issues facing families, with evidence-based, practical strategies. And if school struggles are part of the puzzle, check out how Tutor Teach can help. Now, let's dive into the episode.
Have you ever wondered if introducing your child to a second language early on might confuse them? Or if it might just open doors to a whole new world? I'm your host, Lara, and today we're joined by an incredible guest, Dr. Katherine Mueller. Dr. Mueller is an assistant professor at the Werklund School of Education at the University of Calgary, where she's been shaping future language educators since 2013. Before that, she taught everything from high school core French to university-level French courses, and her passion for language learning has earned her multiple Teaching Excellence Awards. She's a national leader in second language education, serving as vice president of the Canadian Association of Second Language Teachers, and she spent nearly a decade training teachers in the neuro-linguistic approach. In this episode, we explore why early exposure to a second language is so powerful, what the research says about bilingual development in young children, and how language learning shapes far more than just vocabulary. It builds connection, confidence, and cultural awareness. Dr. Mueller also shares practical, reassuring tips for parents who don't speak a second language themselves and how they can still support their child's journey. Whether your child is already in a language program or you're just beginning to explore the idea, this conversation is packed with insight and encouragement. You won't want to miss it. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. To start off, can you share a little bit about what first sparked your passion for the French language and language learning in general?
Thank you for having me. So I think my joy for French and other languages started when I was in grade 4 and I took core French in Ontario. And I think, I was not much of a science person or anything. And I think this was really I found my strength, right? And I found my voice and my passion. And I pursued it as a primary topic, I guess, all the way through. I did my degrees in French, a master's in French, and ultimately a PhD in education with a focus in French. So it's always been a passion for me, always.
And you started when you were in grade 4.
Yeah.
That goes to show you it's never too late to start. That's always something that we talk about.
Oh, no. And I mean, this was core French, which in Alberta we call French as a second language. But it twigged with me, right? And it was something that I was able to see the value in, I guess. My family, there's a German speaking background there. So I had heard another language off and on. It wasn't a fluency thing, but and I think I realized the value of having that in your toolkit, right? When you went out into the world, no matter with whom you were speaking, you would go out and you would know that you had something else to offer. And I see it even now when I travel as an adult. You go to Quebec or something and you're just able to pull that out as easily as you do it in English. And I think it's really a useful gift to have.
I agree. And I have 4 kids and they look at it as a superpower. And so they think it's incredible. So we were at an airport and we were coming back from Disney earlier this year and my son overheard a couple speaking French. And he was whispering, I understand everything they're saying. He was so proud. And then he went up to them and started talking. And it turns out that they lived right up the road from one of our family members. And so it's such a connection piece.
It is. And it really does. I mean, for children, for sure, but even for adults, you go out there into the world and you realize that the world is bigger than your little city where you live. It's huge and it's a way to connect with other people. So there is value in learning that second language or third or fourth additional language. Right?
Absolutely. So you've taught learners at so many levels from high school to university, and now you work closely with student teachers during their practicums in elementary classrooms. With that wide lens, what would you say are the biggest benefits of introducing a second language early in a child's life?
Well, I think as I alluded to just now, I think the earlier you start, the better, right? It expands your worldview. It expands your I mean, we won't even get into talking about what it does for your brain, because it's huge. You're exercising parts of your brain that you may not ordinarily employ. But the value is just that it gives you more to work with, right? And I mean, you understand, of course, in an elementary scenario, the kids tend to speak French in their classroom or in their school, perhaps at special events, but it is quite restricted. But if you go on school trips or anything like that to a francophone area or to a French speaking place, you realize pretty quickly as a child that you have something that not everybody else has. So it definitely, from a cultural and from a social perspective, I think it's a really useful gift to have. It really is. And as you said, I my teaching career was mostly high school, and then university, of course. And I did even teach the French language at the university level to beginners. So in a sense, that was like teaching kindergarten, right? Because they're older, but they had no French, nothing. So you would start from the beginning, and the pleasure in watching adults come to that realization, right? Seeing that light bulb over their head when they realize I've got something really special happening here, is a really big deal for an educator. And then now my work is with the Werklund School of Education at the University of Calgary. So I supervise student teachers. So I'm in elementary and junior high and some senior high classrooms for half the year. So I'm watching the little ones and seeing how, again, it's that light bulb right over their head. One of the strategies that teachers employ is to push the students to say it in French, right? They come up to you and they want to say, Madame, can I go to my locker? And you look at them and you give them a sentence starter. In other words, no, you're going to try this in French.
Madame, est-ce que je peux?
Yeah. And I've seen it time and time again where the kids come up and they go, I can't say that. And the teacher gives them the first couple of words and boom, off they go. So it's up there in their head for sure. And I think that's actually one of the most valuable pieces of classroom language learning, is that a teacher who is well trained in the strategies of language learning can push the kids faster and farther than they would ordinarily go.
Absolutely. And I even remember as a child myself, my dad would not answer me until I said it in French. He'd just go, pardon, in French, pardon, pardon.
Yeah.
And then eventually it's like, okay, I'll just say it. But it's a confidence play a little bit, like
Oh, it
they may
is.
not, I mean, as a young child, you don't know that it's a confidence thing, but it is. Am I going to get it right or am I going to get it wrong?
And I think that's where the teacher, a well-trained language teacher, let's say a French immersion teacher, knows that you have to create an environment where the students do not fear making mistakes, right? That's a really critical piece. And that, making a mistake when you speak another language is a learning opportunity, right? And if the teacher corrects you or redirects you to say it a different way, that's not a bad thing, right? That's helping you expand your language repertoire in order to be able to say more eloquently, right?
I remember having that conversation with my dad, and he's French Canadian, and he was like, "Why do you always go straight to English? Why not French?" And I was like, "I'm scared to make mistakes." And he's like, "What about me with my English?" He's like, "I make mistakes all the time when I speak English, but here I go," right? So everyone has that fear, the French speaking the English language and English speaking French. And so we're all in the same boat, essentially.
Of course, of course. And I think, for kids, and this is one thing where traveling is a good thing, is that they get out there and they realize it doesn't matter if you make mistakes. The big goal, and I teach this to my university Bachelor of Education students, the goal of communication is to ensure that your message is understood, right? It doesn't mean it has to be perfect. It means it has to be understood. So, in fact, a teacher should be helping their students to come up with strategies to work on that message to ensure that it is understood no matter what they have to do. And if you have to resort to gestures and facial expressions, you're still contributing to the understanding of the message, right? So, it's more than just verbal language, right? And mistakes are not bad. They're not bad.
I get asked all the time. I want to know how you would answer this question. People ask me, do you think in English or in French? I find that
Oh
question
dear.
so hard to answer.
Oh my goodness. It is hard to answer. I think in like three or four languages because I speak German as well, and I have a little bit of Italian, and every now and then, it comes out and mostly in Italian restaurants, I guess. But
Right. You
um,
get, like, I think in the culture that I'm immersed in the moment.
that's where, yeah, it's like you have two channels, right? And I mean, this is another thing I think that parents often worry, oh, is my child going to be confused, right? Are they going to start cross checking themselves as they're speaking? It's not a problem, right? That's what your brain is doing when you have two languages. It's busy making sure that they're in the right compartment. But at the same time, that is often why when I speak French, for instance, in the middle of a sentence, and I can't even explain what happens, I will do, like with students, what we call code switching, where you suddenly, the French word just isn't there. So I'll say it in English and then you keep going in French. And every speaker of other languages does it, right? It's not a bad thing and it's not a problem. But as to whether you think in English or French or whichever other language, it is a fascinating thought. I think it's just where you let your brain go. There are times when I do think in French, and other times when, of course, I think in English and then I flip my language channel and I say what I'm going to say in French. So, but you're not translating. I want to make that part super, super clear because translation is a profession, right? It's not something that we as speakers of multiple languages do. And when I start speaking in French, I'm not constructing my message first in English and then give me a minute, I need to translate this. It doesn't happen that way. That's what thinking in the other language means. You just construct it as it comes out.
That's interesting because when I was younger and I was in French schooling, I would write, say, an essay or dissertation, whatever, and the teacher would say, "I can tell that you thought this up in English and
Yes.
went ahead and
Yeah.
translated that to a French sentence, and it doesn't work that way." So that's actually
Doesn't.
really, really interesting.
And it doesn't work that way at
No.
all, right? Because, what many of us who are Anglophones by birth, who have learned French over the years, right, the hard way, um, when I write in French still, there are times, and I mean, I write at a university level, but there are times when I'll reread what I've written and say, oh my, that is an English expression that you've translated word for word, right? So those are the things, and that's why translators get paid a small fortune, is because they know that it's two separate systems, right? And that you can't just translate word for word. It won't come out naturally at all.
Does everyone hear that? That Google Translate and ChatGPT are
No,
not
no,
going to be
no.
your friends here.
Not good tools. I mean, and I often speak to parent groups and I tell parents, if you're trying to help your child with homework, do not just fire a text into Chat GPT. If you want to do that for yourself on the side so that you understand what's going on, that's one thing. But, having a child write their answer to some question in English and then translating it does not help at all. The challenge of learning another language is in fact to push yourself to say, how am I going to express this? And I would argue that's the fun of it too, right? Is okay, this is a challenge. How am I going to construct this message that I want to say? So yeah, and translation, Google Translate, you get not good quality language out of those things at all.
No, I think it's the purpose of those is to, if you're stuck on a word,
Yes, single word,
that's
fine.
okay. And also,
Yes.
if you need to know the context, you need to have the background in the
Yep.
language to even trust what comes out of that. So,
Yeah.
yeah. So, bouncing off of that, some parents worry that early exposure to a second language might cause confusion or slow their child's English development. What does the research say about that, and what have you observed in practice?
So the answer is it does not slow English language development. If a parent is watching like a hawk, they may perhaps perceive that their child is occasionally searching for a word at home in English. That is not a danger signal. It is not a bad thing. In fact, what having the two languages does is it develops um, simultaneously and side by side two linguistic systems, right? And that's why I referred earlier to code switching, because sometimes You just have a blip, as we all do, and you go across and pick the word from the other language and come back. It does not slow their English development. I mean, those of you who have children will know that when your kids were little, oftentimes they would have what we call a silent period, right? And parents are, panicking and saying, "Oh my goodness, my child they're not developing language." Yes, they are. They're just doing it up in their head, right? They're busy taking it in. One of the models that I often present when I speak to teacher groups or parent groups is a very simple model of how kids learn language, or how any of us learn language. We need input, which means lots and lots of language coming in, both verbally and written, in the written form, which we take into our brain as data, right? And then our brain gets busy sorting things out, looking for patterns, looking for things that we've heard before, things that sound familiar, all of those things. So you're very busy processing when you're listening to another language. And I would offer as an example, if you know a little bit of Spanish and you go to Mexico on holiday, you're not just tuning it out. You're busy listening to see what you can pick up, right?
You might come
and
back
then your
with
brain
more.
is doing it, right? And your brain is doing the work without you even, right? It's just busy processing. The next piece you need is interaction. And that's what teachers provide in the classroom, right? They provide opportunities for the kids to talk to each other in partners, in small groups, to talk to the teacher, to talk to guest speakers who come, to interact with written texts by ripping them apart and seeing what they can find. And all of that is processing that data that they took in, right? So you take it in, your brain does its thing, and then you work on it in a deliberate fashion. And the final piece that's critical, with a capital C, critical, is output. So the teachers need to provide opportunities for the students to practice the hypotheses that they've made about the language by creating output. And as I said at the beginning, communicating a message, that is speaking another language. So these opportunities for output are so important for the learner to practice what they're trying to say. So all of these pieces work together, but the point is, it does not slow down or stop your first language, which is lingering in the background when you're in French class, right? In fact, it supports it, because all language is good language, and all opportunities to learn language contribute to your brain function, right? So if you're in French immersion, you're going to end up being a better speaker of English, because your brain is busy thinking about, how am I saying this, and am I speaking clearly and eloquently and communicating my message well, whichever language.
Here's my theory. Tell me if you agree with it.
Okay.
Where we live, which is Western Canada, we're very exposed to the English language. It is the predominantly exposed language that people hear in the grocery store, at rec centers, things like that. So in my opinion, when you're taking on the French, the English has already been so established, at least from a receiver and oral perspective, that it can take a little bit of a backseat to learn the French, so that they can both be learned in tandem. Essentially, they're being learned in tandem anyway.
It is. And there's no risk at all to your English. And I hear this question a lot from parents. I don't hear them speaking English because they're speaking French at school. Or even worse, is there a risk that they're going to lose their English? Of course not. You live as you said, we're in Western Canada, in large cities. The minute they set foot outside the school, they're speaking in English again, right? And you don't forget, especially as a child. But even you'll often hear older people say, "Oh, I came from such and such a country when I was 15, and now I really don't speak the language anymore." Well, that's because there's been absolutely no exposure, right? But oftentimes, even if they have some exposure, it will kick back in. So it's like riding a bicycle, as they say. It's up there. You don't forget it. But certainly not over the course of a school year. The child is not, even if they're in French immersion, it's not all day, every minute of the waking hours, right? There is still English, and they're exposed to English everywhere they go.
Even
right?
during recess.
And that's a thing for teachers, rather.
Yeah, it is.
how do we keep our kids speaking French during recess? And I agonize over this question every year with my new group of Bachelor of Ed students. Should we even be spending our time panicking over this? Or should we just let the kids have that brain break for 15 minutes? It's not a big deal, right? And, some teachers, well, I need them to speak French in the corridor. Well, yeah, you do. But if they don't, it's not going to destroy their French. It's just giving them a bit of a break. So I really have come to the conclusion that it's not the end of the world. Just let it happen as it happens. Kids who are in full French immersion and who, go through, even if they don't go through to the end of high school, still have very competent functional language.
Super
For
foundational.
sure.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So many parents worry that they can't support their child's second language learning because they don't speak the language themselves. What would you say to those parents, and are there any other concerns you hear from families?
So that's the big one for sure. I hear it frequently. I don't speak French. My husband doesn't speak French, but my child is in French immersion. So there are a couple of pieces in the research that are absolutely solidly anchored. These are not up for debate. You as the parent do not need to speak French in order to help your child, if that's your intention at home. One thing that we do know is it's from a researcher. His name is Jim Cummins, Cummins. He is now retired. He is Irish, but did most of his work I think, in Montreal. And his contention is that he's got something that he calls the iceberg theory. Okay, so if you imagine the water line with the biggest part of the iceberg is under the water, and then there are like two mountains emerging, right? When we'll call those your two languages, the two iceberg pieces. What's under the water is called your common underlying proficiency. So that means what I know about fractions, right? And even if I don't open my mouth and express that in any language, I know that, right? I can look at an apple and take a knife and cut it into 4 pieces. And in my head, without expressing it, I know that those are fractions, right? What he says is that one of the icebergs is your native language, your first language. So in our case, we'll say it's English. The second iceberg is your French iceberg, your second language. And there are more, of course. You can have as many icebergs as you want. But the idea is that the underlying proficiency that you can express in either of those languages. So it transfers across these icebergs, right? Knowing that means that if you help your child with math at home in English language, right? You look at the numbers on the page and you help them understand the whatever fraction, addition, subtraction that they're doing, they will go to school the next day with that common underlying proficiency reinforced. And then all they need is the cue from the teacher with perhaps the correct vocabulary to explain themselves, right? So this theory of the iceberg makes complete sense, and it helps parents to understand that it's not a danger signal if you don't speak the target language, right? Just help your child as you can, and they will figure it out at school, because that's the teacher's role, is to provide the vocabulary and the practice in expressing those facts in the second language. Whatever your first language is at home, so if it's Polish, let's say, and you think, oh boy, that's really far from French, doesn't matter. If you speak Polish at home, and if you read books with your kids in Polish, you listen to Polish music, you watch the Polish channel on TV, that language practice, even if it's in another language, helps to develop their literacy and supports them when they get to school. And then they're doing those same processes in French, let's say, if they're in French immersion, or in Spanish, if they're in a Spanish bilingual program. It's any language work that you're pushing them to do with their brain is helpful to their language learning at school. So the short answer is talk to your child, right? It doesn't matter the language, any language support you provide will be helpful to their learning.
It's kind of like muscle memory a little bit. Like when you work out and you do bicep curls every day for however long, you're going to develop defined, nice biceps. If you stop for a bit, they're still there. But then if you want to get them back to where they were, you keep flexing them. And so I think about that in languages a little bit, like you said, is that you will hold on to it, but it doesn't disrupt the fact that you're also working on your leg muscles, or you know what I mean? It's all connected and it all makes sense. But yeah, that is a fear for parents is, well, if I can't sustain it at home, what is it? How is it any good?
And in fact, I think parents might overestimate the danger of not being able to do that. It doesn't matter. Just make sure your child's brain is stimulated. That's really the big thing. And of course, I don't mean by video games or by 8 hours of television, but just by talking and communicating and writing a post-it note. Honey, can you write down the grocery list for me? That in itself, a small little task like that, helps them practice their writing skills and their transferring of what they're hearing onto paper, which tomorrow in school will come in handy, right? It may be in a different language, but we're taking care of that in the French immersion program or in the Spanish bilingual program or whatever program your child is enrolled in.
I mean, I encourage my kids to try and teach my husband French. They will tell him, do you know what an apple is in French? Do you know what, do you know how people, they think it's funny how their teachers say their names in French because it doesn't sound like it in English. And so just kind of making it a little bit of a challenge as a family is fun, and
it is.
You learn along the way with your kids. Why not?
That's right. And it makes it enjoyable as well, right? And I think that's, if I had one big message, and again, this comes from my many, many years of experience in multiple language environments, it shouldn't be painful, right? It shouldn't be torture. And I mean, I remember certain language experiences that I had where I remember when I was at university the first time around, I took Italian and I adored my prof. He was just an amazing person. But he had this revolutionary new technique where he put us all in a circle in chairs, and then he would stand in the middle and he would spin around and point at you and fire off a verb that you needed to conjugate. And he called it thunder and lightning. And this was just the greatest technique. And people were petrified that they were going to be the next victim, right? And that you had to produce this verb form. It's that's not how you learn, right? You learn by being in an actual context where you need to come up with that verb form with a little bit of prompting in order to communicate your message, as I said before. And that's really the critical piece. So, well, I all due respect to this lovely prof, I don't think that was a good technique to use. It was scary.
Yeah, you don't want to be scared into learning, that's for sure.
No, exactly.
So we get parents all the time who tell us that, they ask us, well, do you think I should pull my child from French immersion? They don't seem to be picking up their English literacy or their French literacy at the same pace as the other language, things like that. So what would you say to a parent who maybe thinks their child doesn't belong in the language program anymore after giving it a shot for a few years?
I mean, my first reaction is persist, right? Because there are moments when it feels frustrating or when you don't feel like you're making progress. But the students who persist through are the ones who end up bilingual. It's almost that simple. I mean, the other thing I hear all the time is, well, my child is not doing well in math, so I think we're going to pull them out of French immersion. And it's no, it's not the fault of French that your child is having trouble with math. If you move them to English program, they're still going to have trouble with math. So the problem is the math, right? So as I alluded to earlier, the solution would be to go and find a tutor in English. And if the child understands those concepts, talk back to the iceberg theory, right? If they understand the concepts of how this works, they can go back to school and do it in the French language. So the language is not the problem. And I think, there is research that says that there's 0.5% of students who are in French immersion, for instance, shouldn't be there. And it tends to be either a physical issue that they're not able to articulate the sounds of the language well, which then leads to serious frustration, right, and lack of communication. Or sometimes if there are severe behavioral issues or learning difficulties, that can be more of a hindrance than a help. I think. So most students, and that includes students with learning challenges, can be successful in French immersion or Spanish bilingual or whatever program you've got them in. It's not, pulling them out doesn't really help in any way. And you think you're doing a child a favor by reducing the stress, when in fact, if you can find a way to encourage them and make them understand the value of what they're doing, or how much fun it is, or go somewhere where they can practice it and they say, hey, I'm actually learning something, right? That's the approach I think I would take, as opposed to just a knee-jerk reaction and pull them out of the program.
Because you know what ends up happening when they pull them out of the program, they'll then come to tutor teach and say, my kid is now so behind from the French immersion program that we need to catch them up because they are completely lost in the system now. And like you said, like math is math, science is science, and all this. And so it's tough because then the blame goes into that learning that second language.
In a sense, it has nothing to do with it, right? All you're doing is changing the channel, the language channel. You're learning the same content. You're developing that same common underlying proficiency that I talked about before. You're still learning about science, and you're learning about social studies, and you're learning about phys ed or whatever you're learning. It's just you're doing it in a different language, a different medium, right? But you're still learning it. And I think that's probably the piece that a lot of people aren't aware of, that the language is not going to cause damage, and it's not going to put the student behind either, right? When I go into classrooms, grade 6 or wherever I end up mostly these days, in grade 5 and 6, the kids are able to express themselves fluently about any topic that they're discussing. Will they make the odd mistake with a verb? Yes. Is it the end of the world? No, it's not, right? And I mean, teachers have there are various strategies for, we call it a corrective feedback, which means error correction, right? And some of them work better than others, but what we try and do, there is a famous researcher, I call him the champion of French immersion. His name is Roy Lister. He's also retired, but his one part of his body of work was creating sort of a menu of options for error correction. And when teachers are aware of this, they can then tailor how they react to student production in different ways. And, there are times when I would just let the student go, just talk. Are you making mistakes? Oh, yeah. Does it matter because it's not impeding your message? No, it doesn't. I would rather see you get on a jag where you're talking for 5 minutes in French. That's the most valuable thing I can see with a student, right? Is that they just, off they go. And are those mistakes going to damage them? No, they're not, right? They'll figure it out, and you can address those issues at other moments, right? I mean, teachers are really good at keeping mental lists of these things. So you do get back to
what might damage them is correcting them mid-sentence, and then their confidence goes down, and they're like, you know what, I lost my train of thought, forget it.
Never mind.
Yeah.
Precisely.
We have some parents who come to us and they're like, I don't care if you teach my kid their math in English or French, I just need them to get the skills. And so you can see some parents understand that it's not a language-based thing, whereas others, absolutely not. I mean, they think that one impedes the other. It's like they're almost getting in the way of each other.
Yeah. And that's, to me, that's fears talking, right? And if you don't understand how the process works, or if you're nervous, and obviously all parents are nervous about their children, right? I mean, I've been there too. You want them to succeed and do well and be the best they can be. But I would argue that with everything that we know about language learning, patience and persistence are your best friends, right? If you can just encourage your child to stick with it, and even if it seems really hard, the other thing that enters into this is peer pressure, right? Well, all my friends are leaving French immersion. Well, too bad for them, because they're losing out, right? They're not going to have that gift by the end of it. So
yeah, and like you said before we even hopped on this call, it's having young minds understand the value of that second language at a young age, that they hold on to that value as they grow older, that they don't want to let go of that.
That's right. I've seen kids in classrooms. I'll pull out grade 5, I guess, as an example, who, the teacher encourages them to respond to some personal question. What did you do on the weekend? And the kid starts talking, and then they add more and they add more. And the teacher interacts with a couple of comments, and you've got a conversation going. And then at the end, you can see the look of victory on their face when they realize, oh my goodness, I just said all that in Spanish or in French, right? And I think it's that feeling of success and victory. That's what keeps them going, and that's what makes them realize that they have something that, if they can continue with encouragement, they can turn this into a valuable piece of their life, right? And being able to speak another language or two other languages or however many.
Yeah, and it starts from the top down.
Of course.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So what are some easy practical ways parents can help their child at home, even if they don't know the language their child is learning?
So, as I said, I think one of the things is to just encourage good literacy practice at home, right? So that means speaking in complete sentences, right? Actually having conversations at home. And I mean, I understand, of course, being a parent too, life gets busy. And it's, come to the table, hurry up, we have to eat, we're running off to hockey practice. But if you can just take moments to chat with your child, right? And actually, in the home language, it does not have to be French or whatever, it can just be in the home language. So any literacy practice that you can indulge in is helpful. So speaking, reading with your child, and parents often say, well, my child is supposed to read this book in French, but I don't understand the book. The one thing you don't ask them to do is, okay, can you translate for me while you're reading? You don't ask them to translate. What you say, in fact, is, oh, so I see in the picture that the boy is, whatever he's doing. Can you tell me why he's doing that? Which then pushes the child to, I'm going to use the word interpret, but not in a translation way, right? To re-explain what's happening. And that is the value. So that is something that you can do to encourage your child. And it also pushes different buttons in their brain, right? Because they're realizing, oh, she doesn't want me to translate it. She wants me to tell her what's going on in the story.
It's comprehension.
Right. And I mean, when my children were little, in the rocking chair at night with the storybooks, and I read to them in English, and we had conversations about the book. I wasn't translating or anything like that. We were just expanding, like taking the kernel of the story and exploding it out like popcorn, right? To see what else it would lead us to discuss. So I think those are the types of things that can be useful. And again, if you speak another home language, as I referred to Polish before, or Italian, or whatever you speak at home, ask your kids to write the grocery list out in Italian. I mean, it seems like nothing, but it's actually a really valuable skill, because it's pushing their brain to transfer between languages, right? That's what we want them to be doing in the classroom as well. So if you can encourage that in any way at home, then you're reinforcing those skills.
Even for us at home, my 3-year-old just turned 4, and I'm reading a Robert Munch book to him. It's called Marie-Lou Cascou. And okay. I read this book to all of the 2 older boys too. And he doesn't have a grasp on French yet. But what's happening is he's listening to me read it, and then he's looking at the pictures. And he's going, oh, so she fell off the fridge, and her parents are telling her to be careful because he can read the pictures, right? And so now he's able to start taking the words I'm saying, and he's going, this is when she hurts herself. This is when the parents are talking. Right. So we read it repetitiously because he loves it. He thinks it's funny. But what's interesting is he's really actually honing what's being said. And even more interestingly is he can't say his R's yet in English, but he can say them in French.
Oh my gosh.
And so that's epic.
Congratulations.
For us. Yeah, because he can say them in French, we know he'll get it in English. Right. And so
of course
it's very interesting, the whole language thing, and the way that a young child absorbs it all the way into adulthood, and how they're able to decode and process the language in different ways.
You can, I mean, if you could see their brain, with the brain waves or whatever, you would basically see ping, 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 right? Those little neurons are firing all over the place. And what you exactly did is if you read it to him in French and he's explaining it back to you in English, that's the ideal, right? So
Yeah.
you are helping your child learn French, even if you perhaps didn't speak French yourself, right?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. Language is so much more than just vocabulary. It's also about culture and connection. We talked about this earlier. How do you see second language learning shaping a child's understanding of the world and their place in it?
That's a huge question. It's really big, but I think, and this is a responsibility of teachers in the classroom, which we in the profession of teacher preparation are doing, right? We're telling them you can't just teach the curriculum. You also have to make students aware of the broader world, right? So we see, like in Alberta and many other most other provinces, I think they have francophone festivals, right? And we celebrate La Semaine de la Francophonie, and we celebrate, the Sugar Shack in the spring, and all of these traditions that are very Canadian, but that make the child understand that French is not just some weird thing you're doing at school, but that it actually has a purpose, right? And I mean, you bring in, many schools that I've been in bring in guest speakers who speak to the kids at their elementary level, but in French. Or they bring in francophone music and dance, right? And the kids realize, and I can't tell you how many little students have said, um, real people speak French. Yeah, they do. Right. And I think that's really the key to opening that up, is that they realize, or even if you show them a YouTube video, there are some lovely platforms that we recommend to our education students to start integrating into their lesson planning that have, there's one that's kind of like, if you can imagine, educational YouTube for little kids in French, right? So they have all these videos where there are real live francophone children speaking about their daily life. I'm going to walk you through my toys. These are my toys. This is what I play with every day. And I look at the faces of the students here in Calgary looking at this video saying, oh my goodness, those are real kids. They actually speak French every day. And that to me is the greatest moment, because then that's when they realize, gee, if I stick with this, I could go to that country where that child is speaking from on the YouTube video, and I could speak with him, right? And I think it's creating that sense of connection, right? That they understand that they're part of a bigger thing.
That's the
Right?
big thing, is connection. And I told you before we started our podcast, we had a good conversation before we started here, but when we went to Mexico, the kids were able to actually learn so much Spanish there, and they were talking to other kids, and it was because of the foundation of their French, not from their English so much, but their French, because
Right.
there's a likeness in those languages. And so it's neat to see how you can really learn about other people and about their way of life and find that commonality through language and culture. It's
Right.
really, really cool.
And I mean, the one thing with young children, and this is another argument for really entering these programs and sticking with them as young kids, is that they are so much less self-conscious and nervous
Yes.
and anxious than we are as adults, right? I mean, if I were to go now and, study a Scandinavian language, I would feel weird, and it would take me a while to get the courage to blurt something out. But we find that students, especially say between K and 6, before adolescence hits, right? But those are the years when they'll try anything. Doesn't matter. You fire something at them and they realize how useful it is, and they'll use it constantly. So those are the years when we should take advantage of that personality trait, I guess, and the lack of fear and the willingness to try and use that to promote their language learning.
It's
to
so
support their language
true.
learning.
It's such a sweet, sweet spot. Thinking back, like being in drama and being on stage, and you don't care what anyone thinks about you, but then fast forward a few years and you're like, I would never do that again. I can't believe I did that. How did I do that? You have this invincibility cloak. It's this confidence. And it's too bad that it gets withered away a little bit with life, because it's so precious.
Even in adolescence.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, that's why, late French immersion, though, as most of us know, starts in grade 7. And it is highly successful and can be as successful as early immersion, meaning immersion that starts in kindergarten or grade 1. Kids who start in grade 7 can achieve the same levels to the extent that I can't distinguish when they started. That's how good they get. So it's because it's cognitive maturity, right? They start in grade 7, their brain is already functioning at peak performance. They know how they learn. They know what strategies work best for them, so they can achieve the same level. But grade 7 is also the time when they're very self-conscious and very aware of how everyone is perceiving them, afraid to make mistakes and so on. It does work well despite that. But I think the advantage for the little ones is that they don't have that. And by the time they hit middle school, grade 5, 6, 7, they're already entrenched in French. So it's almost as if it's not a problem anymore.
They don't know any different.
No, exactly.
Yeah. And that's the important part about starting it so young, is that's just part of their fabric. It's just part of their foundation of learning. It's all they know. Before we wrap up, if listeners want to connect with you and explore more of your work, where's the best place for them to go?
So they could visit the website for the Werklund School of Education at the University of Calgary. I'm in there. Happy to connect with parents. They could connect with me through you as well. But happy to answer questions privately or via email. There are Canadian Parents for French, I will say, is a really good organization, and they often host evenings for parents. And they speak about, some of these issues related to French immersion and even French as a second language, core French scenarios. I would say connect with your school administration too, and ask them, who do you know who could come and speak to us as a parent group, who could give us some comfort and information, right? And most administrators are connected to the network out here, and could certainly provide that.
That's awesome. Well, as you know, I could probably hold you here for another hour. I love this topic. I'm passionate about this topic.
Yeah.
This was born into me as a child, the importance of language, and I'm just so passionate about it. So thank you for sharing a different perspective and for maybe giving parents a little bit of a sigh of relief that they are on the right track, and it's not going to be easy. But it's not easy even if your kid's in English learning or French learning. It's always going to be challenging because we don't, every kid's different. They learn differently. And all we can do is support them and build confidence in them and give them the tools. And I think you really spoke to that from not only a parent perspective, but the important work that teachers are doing and that you're doing. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
That's it for this episode of Parenting Adventures. Thanks for listening. We hope it gives you that extra bit of confidence that you need to conquer the road ahead. And if you're looking for academic support to ensure your kids thrive in school, visit tutorteach.ca to learn how we're here for families just like yours. We'll see you in the next episode.